A mountain man and his dog bought an abandoned cabin, but they never knew what lay beneath. The floorboards creak, a lantern flickers. A hidden cellar yawns open, filled with dust, toys, and journals long forgotten. At first, it seemed like just another broken home on the edge of a dying town. But under those boards lay a secret that powerful men would kill to keep buried hooves. Thunder passed, flames engulfed the cabin. A woman's voice cries out, "This was my mother's land." Suddenly, the cabin wasn't just shelter, it was the key to water, to justice, to survival itself. And once the truth came to light, the whole valley turned against them. Gun belts snap, ranchers spit in the dust. A preacher trembles. At his pulpit, the dog drags his master from the flames. What happens when one mountain man, one woman, and one loyal dog stand alone against greed, prejudice, and fire? Will the truth save them or burn them alive? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now and if this story speaks to you. Make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The autumn wind moaned through the pines. As Elijah Cross guided his horse down the narrow mountain trail, his faithful hound Judah padded alongside, nose to the ground, while their pack mule plodded behind with weary steps. The beast's back bent under the weight of everything Elijah owned in this world: tools, traps, dried meat, and the worn Bible his Sarah had given him before the fever took her. The abandoned mining town appeared through the trees like a gathering of ghosts. Weather-beaten buildings slouched against each other, their windows dark and empty. A few thin streams of smoke rose from scattered chimneys, showing that some folks still called this place home. Elijah's boots rang hollow on the wooden sidewalk as he made his way to the land office. Inside, a clerk with ink-stained fingers barely looked up from his ledger. "Help you, stranger. Need a place for winter?" Elijah said, his voice rough from disuse. "Heard there might be empty cabins hereabouts." The clerk's pen scratched across paper. "Got one up Cedar Creek Way. Previous owners, well, they moved on sudden-like. Price is fair enough." Elijah counted out silver coins from his leather pouch. The clerk pushed a deed across the desk, then hesitated. "Folks say that place ain't right. 3 families gone missing over the years. Some call it cursed." "Ain't much for ghost stories," Elijah replied. He'd known real pain-cursed cabins held no fear for him. As he led his animals up the overgrown trail, townspeople watched from doorways. An old woman crossed herself. A child ducked behind his mother's skirts. Elijah ignored them all. Focused on reaching shelter before nightfall, the cabin hunched in a small clearing, its roof sagging like a broken back. Half-rotted leaves carpeted the yard. The door hung crooked on rusty hinges. Inside, dust lay thick. On rough-hewn furniture table, 2 chairs, a bedstead with a straw-filled tick. Previous owners had left in a hurry, by the look of things. Elijah unpacked while daylight lasted, stacking supplies and laying fresh straw in the tick. Judah prowled the cabin's single room, sniffing corners and scratching at the floorboards. The dog's unease prickled at Elijah's neck, but he pushed the feeling aside. They needed shelter, nothing more. As darkness fell, he lit a lamp and tried to coax life from the cold hearth. The chimney drew well enough once he cleared old ashes. Soon, a small fire cast dancing shadows on the log walls. Outside, wind sighed through pine boughs. Inside, the cabin's timbers creaked and settled, wood expanding as warmth returned. Elijah sat in one of the chairs, Sarah's Bible open on his knee. The familiar words brought little comfort these days, but habit drew him to evening prayers regardless. "Lord," he whispered. "If you're still listening to an old fool," he trailed off, unsure what to ask for. Peace, maybe, or purpose. Judah's sudden growl broke his reverie. The dog stood rigid, hackles raised, staring at the floorboards near the hearth. Elijah set the Bible aside and knelt to investigate. The planks shifted strangely under his weight, as if they weren't properly secured. One board felt loose when he pressed it. "Leave it for morning," he told himself. But something about the way the boards moved, not the natural give of old wood, but deliberate, like a hidden mechanism, made his skin crawl. Judah wouldn't settle, pacing and whining softly. "Easy, boy," Elijah murmured. "Nothing here but mice and memories." But he double-checked his rifle was loaded before stretching out on the tick. Judah curled close, nose pointed toward the suspicious floorboards. The fire burned low. Wind voices whispered at the windows. Every few minutes, the cabin's bones would groan, timbers flexing as if the structure drew breath. Elijah told himself. It was natural all buildings talked to themselves at night. Still, sleep was slow in coming. His last thought before drifting off was that maybe the townsfolk's warnings weren't just superstition. Maybe there was something wrong with this place after all. But he was too tired to worry about it now. Tomorrow would be soon enough to investigate properly. Beside him, Judah's ears twitched at every sound, the faithful hound standing guard against whatever secrets the night might hold. Together, man and dog slipped into uneasy dreams while the cabin creaked around them, its mysteries still hidden beneath those strange, shifting floors. Dawn painted the mountain peaks in pale gold as Elijah climbed onto the cabin's slumping roof. Loose shingles clattered beneath his boots. The damage wasn't as bad as he'd feared. A few hours' work would keep the weather out. He'd salvaged usable shingles from a fallen shed out back, and his hammer rang steady against the nails as morning mist burned away. Below, Judah's urgent barking drew his attention. The dog hadn't settled since they'd arrived, and now he scratched. Frantically at the warped floorboards near the hearth, Elijah climbed down, his joints protesting. "What's got you so worked up, boy?" The dog's eyes fixed on him, then back to the floor. Something about those shifting boards nagged at Elijah's mind. He fetched his pry bar from his tools and wedged it under the suspicious plank. The wood groaned, then lifted. Beneath lay another board and another, until his efforts revealed something unexpected, a trapdoor. "Well now," Elijah muttered, "that's a fair bit of trouble to hide a root cellar." He worked the stones loose one by one, their rough edges catching his calloused palms. The last stone shifted, and stale air wafted up from the darkness below. Elijah lit his lantern and eased down rotting steps, Judah close behind. The cellar stretched deeper than he'd expected, its earthen walls shored up with timber. Cobwebs draped every corner like tattered lace. But it was the items scattered about that caught his Ajah child's wooden horse, missing one leg. A rag doll slumped against a wall. Most telling were the books, hymnals with broken spines, and a stack of leather-bound journals tied with faded twine. He settled on the bottom step, Judah's warm bulk against his leg, and opened the first journal. The handwriting was neat, educated a woman's hand. He read aloud, his voice echoing in the closed space. April 15th, 1872. The Apache children are learning their letters well, though some parents remain wary. Joseph says we must be patient, that God's work takes time. Little Sarah delights in teaching them hymns. Elijah's throat tightened at the name. He skipped ahead several pages. September 3rd, dark rumors from town. The mining company claims our deed is void. Joseph says not to worry, the land was purchased fair, but I see concern in his eyes. The spring water is precious here. Too precious, perhaps. The next entry was written in a shaking hand. They came today with papers, with guns. Joseph says we must leave, but how can we abandon those who trust us? There are promises buried deep, justice that will come in God's time. I've hidden the proof where they won't think to look. The writing ended there. Elijah closed the journal, dust puffing from its pages. The air felt thick with memory, with words left unspoken. These weren't just papers, they were fragments of lives interrupted, of mission work destroyed. He gathered the journals carefully, but left them below. Some secrets needed time to reveal themselves. He replaced the floorboards, though Judah whined at hiding the truth again. "Peace, boy," Elijah soothed. "We'll sort it out proper." Evening settled over the mountains like a purple blanket. Elijah stirred a pot of beans over the fire, his mind still dwelling on the missionary family's fate. The spoon clinked against tin, a lonely sound in the gathering dark. Judah's head snapped up, ears forward. Footsteps crunched on fallen leaves outside, too light for a man's tread, too purposeful for a deer. The dog growled low in his throat. A shadow crossed the window. Then came a single, firm knock. Elijah's hand moved to his rifle, but something held him back. In the lamplight stood a young woman, trail-worn but carrying herself with quiet dignity. A bedroll was slung across her shoulder. Her features spoke of Apache blood, but her eyes were startlingly pale, a mix of worlds in one. Face, those eyes met his steadily as she spoke. "This cabin belonged to my mother, belonged to my mother." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elijah looked at her. Again re-looked. He saw the same strength he'd sensed in the journal entries, the same determination. Here was the missing piece of the story buried beneath his feet. Judah's growl faded to silence. The dog padded forward, sniffed once at the woman's hand, then sat peaceful at her feet. That, more than anything, told Elijah to listen to what she had to say. Elijah kept his hand near the rifle, but didn't raise it. The woman's words echoed. In the cabin, this cabin belonged to my mother, stirring up the dust of secrets he'd uncovered that very morning. Your mother, he said carefully, studying her face in the lamplight. Would that be the missionary's wife? She nodded, her shoulders straight despite evident weariness. Sarah Alvarado, I'm Mara. Her pale eyes, so striking against her darker features, swept the cabin's interior. The last time I stood here, I was 7 years old. Judah padded closer, nose twitching. The dog's usual wariness with strangers had softened to curiosity. Found some things today, Elijah said, gesturing toward the floor. Journals, mostly. Spoke of trouble with the mining company. The proof is in those journals, Mara said firmly. The deed, the agreements with the Apache families, all of it. That's why they drove us out. The spring water here, it's precious to both peoples. Something in her quiet certainty touched a chord in Elijah. He'd seen too many good folks pushed off their land by men with paper claims and loaded guns. Best come in then, he said, stepping back from the door. Night's getting cold. Mara entered, her movements careful as a deer in strange woods. She sat at the rough table, her fingers trailing across its scarred surface. Mama used to serve stew here, she murmured, to anyone who came hungry, settler or Apache. Elijah stirred the beans bubbling over the fire, adding a pinch of salt. He pulled cornbread from his saddlebag, simple fare, but hot, as he set out. To tin plates, he noticed how Mara's eyes traced every corner of the cabin, as if rebuilding it from memory. Been wandering long? He asked, serving the food. She took up her spoon with quiet grace. Since they drove us out, Mama died to winters. After, fever took her. Pain flickered across her features. The settlers saw my Apache blood and closed their doors. My father's people, they remembered my mother's folk had once taken their land. No place for a half-blood child. Judah settled at her feet with a contented huff, accepting her presence as natural as the fire's warmth. Elijah watched this with hidden surprise as dogs. Judgment of character had never led him wrong. They ate in companionable silence, broken only by the pop of burning wood and the whisper of wind through the cabin's cracks. Elijah found himself studying her when she wasn't looking, the way she held herself, with dignity despite trail-worn clothes. How her movements spoke of someone used to making do with little. When the meal was done, Elijah gestured to the cabins. Single cot. Take that for the night. I'll bed down here by the fire. Mara hesitated, then nodded her thanks. As she spread her thin blanket on the cot, she turned to him. Lamplight caught the silver cross at her throat, reminder of her mother's faith. Perhaps do you believe God sets men in certain places for a reason? She asked softly. Elijah stared. Into the dying fire, memories of his wife's death pressing heavy on his heart. Used to, he said roughly. Before the fever took my Sarah, prayed till my knees bled, but she died all the same. He arranged his bedroll near the hearth, Judah settling beside him. Reckon God's got his reasons, but I stopped trying to understand. Silence fell between them, thick with unspoken things. Yet something stirred in that quieter recognition, perhaps of shared loss. Or maybe it was something more, some purpose neither could yet see. Mara lay down, pulling her blanket close. Thank you, she whispered, for listening, for believing. Elijah grunted softly in response, but sleep was slow in coming. He lay awake, watching shadows dance on the ceiling, aware of the stranger beneath his roof and the mysteries buried beneath his floor. Judah's steady breathing beside him spoke of the dog's complete acceptance of their visitor. The night wind sang through the mountain pines, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its mate. Inside the cabin, two wounded souls drifted toward sleep, each carrying their own burdens of loss and faith. But something had changed with Mara's arrival, as if the cabin itself had been waiting for her return. For secrets to surface, for old wounds to begin their slow healing, morning crept through the broken shutters. Painting dust motes, gold in the cabin's stale air, Elijah stirred the breakfast fire, while Mara folded her blanket with careful hands. Neither had slept well, both haunted by the secrets beneath their feet. "Reckon we ought to take a proper look," Elijah said, lifting the lantern from its hook. Judah watched as they pulled back the floorboards, the dog's tail thumping against the wooden floor. The cellar steps creaked under their weight as they descended. In the lantern's glow, the underground room seemed smaller than yesterday. Mara moved straight to the pile of journals, her fingers trembling as she lifted one. "This is Mama's writing," she whispered, tracing the faded script. "I'd know it anywhere." She sank to her knees on the packed earth, cradling the book like a precious thing. She wrote everything down, every detail about this land. Elijah held the lantern closer as Mara turned the pages. Her voice grew stronger as she read. "The spring feeds more than just our needs. It's the heart of this valley, hidden deep but flowing true. The creek that waters the whole region starts here, beneath this very ground." "That why the ranchers wanted it back then?" Elijah asked, thinking of the missing family. Mara nodded, her face grave. "And why they want it now? Control. The spring controlled the valley." She clutched the journal tighter. Mama wrote about the attempts to buy us out, the threats that came after. The sound of hoofbeats interrupted them. Judah's bark echoed from above, alert but not alarmed. They climbed quickly from the cellar, replacing the boards before stepping. Outside, a rider approached through the morning mist, his black coat marking him as the town preacher. Elijah recognized him from yesterday's brief encounter in Town Reverend Alcott, a man whose gentle manner seemed at odds with the worry in his eyes. "Mr. Cross," the Reverend called, reining his horse to a stop. "I rode out as soon as I could." His gaze shifted to Mara, surprise flickering across his features. "Miss Alvarado? I had not expected, that is, I'd heard you were far from here." "I've come home, Reverend," Mara said simply, standing straight, despite his obvious discomfort. Alcott dismounted, dust rising from his boots. "Word of your purchase has spread quickly, Mr. Cross. I felt compelled to warn you. These waters are a matter of dispute." "Dispute." Elijah's voice was flat. "Bought it fair and legal yesterday." The Reverend twisted his hat in his hands. "There are those in town men of influence who believe this land should be differently. Managed, they would pay you well to sell. Before trouble comes, never Mara's word cut through the morning air like steel. This land was stolen once. It won't happen again." Alcott's shoulders sagged, the weight of unspoken things pressing down on him. "I remember your mother's kindness, Miss Alvarado, her faith. But times haven't changed as much as we'd hoped." He glanced between them, conflict clear on his face. "Consider carefully, Mr. Cross. Some battles aren't worth the fighting." With that, he mounted up, looking older than when he'd arrived. The sound of his horse's hooves faded into the morning mist, leaving behind a heavy silence. Elijah grabbed his axe, needing to work off the tension building in his chest. The steady rhythm of chopping filled the air as he split logs for the woodpile. Judah paced the yard, alert for more visitors, while Mara sat on the cabin step with her mother's journals. Her whispered prayers carried to him between axe strokes. "Lord, give us strength to stand. Let justice flow like water." The words faded into the sound of splitting wood. Elijah's arms burned with effort, but his mind burned harder. He'd wanted nothing but a quiet place to winter over, to nurse his grief in peace. Now destiny had found, him anyway, wrapped in land deeds and water rights, in a young woman's determination and a dead mother's prayers. The axe bit deep into another log. Judah's ears pricked toward the valley, where men of influence waited, where trouble brewed like storm clouds over the mountains. Elijah felt it closing in the choice between walking away and standing firm, between past hurts and present courage. Behind him, Mara turned another page, her mother's words binding her to this place as surely as the hidden spring bound the valley to this land. The morning sun climbed higher, promising another day of decisions that could not be undone. Evening shadows stretched across the cabin yard as Elijah hammered another shingle into place. The steady rhythm echoed against the mountainside, matching the determination in his weathered face. Below him, Mara worked methodically, stuffing dried moss into gaps between logs. "Winter comes early up here," Elijah said, testing a loose board. Got to seal every crack we can find. Mara nodded, her fingers working the moss deeper. The north wind used to howl through these walls, something fierce. Mama would hang quilts to keep the cold out. They worked in companionable silence as the sun dipped lower. Judah lounged in a patch of fading sunlight, watching them fortify their small fortress. The stack of firewood grew steadily higher against the cabin wall, each log a promise against the coming cold dot inside. As darkness gathered, Elijah lit the oil lamp. Its warm glow softened the cabin's rough edges, making the space feel almost homelike. They sat at the worn table, steam rising from cups of bitter coffee. "Been meaning to ask," Elijah said carefully, "about your mother. What happened after Mara's?" Fingers tightened around her cup. "Never knew for certain. Armed riders came one night, said the land had been sold, that we had no right." Her voice grew distant. "They gave us an hour to pack. Mama got me and my little brother out through the back door, but she went back in for something." Pain flickered across her face. "That was the last time I saw her." Elijah stared into his coffee, memories stirring. "Lost my Sarah to fever 3 winters ago. Nothing I could do but watch her slip away." His throat tightened. "Buried her under the cottonwoods back in Kentucky. Buried my heart there too, I reckon." "I'm sorry," Mara said softly. She reached for one of her mother's journals, perhaps seeking comfort in the familiar pages. The lamplight caught the copper highlights in her dark hair as she bent over the book. "These parts here," she said, pointing to margin notes in flowing script. "Mama wrote them in Apache. She learned the language from my father's people." Her finger traced the strange words. She mapped the underground springs, marked the old boundaries. Elijah leaned closer, studying the careful sketches. Lines showed water's path beneath the earth-dotted trails marking its flow down the valley. Mara's voice grew stronger as she translated, sharing her mother's careful observations of the land's hidden heart. Judah's sudden bark shattered the quiet moment. Outside, hoofbeats approached through the gathering dark. Elijah grabbed his rifle, stepping onto the porch with Mara close behind. 2 riders emerged from the shadows, their horses' breath steaming in the cool air. Elijah recognized the larger man's expensive coat, one of the cattle barons from town. "Evening," the man called, false warmth in his voice. "Name's Burke. Represents some interested parties. Heard you bought this old place." "That's right," Elijah said evenly, keeping his rifle visible but lowered dot. The second rider spat tobacco juice, his eyes fixing on Mara with naked contempt. "Didn't hear you'd taken up with a half-breed squatter." Elijah's grip tightened on his rifle. "Mind your tongue," he said, voice hard as iron. "This lady's family has more claim to this land than any of your interested parties." Burke's friendly manner slipped. "Be reasonable, Cross. There's $500 for you if you sign the deed over tonight. More than fair for this broken-down shack." "This is our land now," Elijah said firmly. "Not for sale at any price." The second rider leaned forward in his saddle. "Might find yourself with more trouble than you bargained for, Mr. Shame if anything happened to your new home." "Get off my property," Elijah growled. Judah's hackles rose, a low growl rumbling in his chest. The men wheeled their horses, Burke calling over his shoulder, "Think on it. Cross. Offer won't stay open forever." After they rode away, Elijah paced the cabin floor, anger and worry warring in his chest. He'd wanted no part of other people's battles, yet here he stood, defending a woman's claim against men who'd think nothing of burning them out. "Thank you," Mara said quietly, touching his arm. Her gentle gesture stopped his pacing. "Few have ever stood up for me like that." They stepped outside into the crisp night air. Above them, stars blazed in the vast black sky. Countless points of light spanning the heavens. Elijah felt something shift in his heart as they stood there. 2 lonely souls brought together by fate and an old cabin's secrets. The night wind whispered through the pines, carrying winter's warning and something else, the sound of hope. Fragile but growing stronger. The autumn days flowed like the valley creek, steady and purposeful. Morning frost silvered the cabin's newly patched roof as Elijah and Mara fell into the rhythm of shared work. Their breath clouded in the cool air as they tackled each task together. The lonely hollow, slowly transforming into something like home. "Keep your back straight," Elijah demonstrated, positioning the axe for another swing. Let the weight of the head do the work. Mara watched intently, then mimicked his stance. Her first few attempts glanced off the log, but soon she found the right angle, the satisfying thunk of splitting wood echoing across the yard. In turn, Mara shared her own wisdom. See how the quail always returned to these bushes. She showed Elijah how to set snares along the game trails, her fingers nimble. With the wire, my father's people taught that you must thank the spirits of the animals that feed us. Their evening meals grew more varied: rabbit stew thick with wild onions, dried berries, cornbread flavored with herbs Mara gathered. The cabin's hearth glowed warm now, smoke curling from the repaired chimney. Even Judah seemed more settled, claiming his spot by the fire as they pored over the journals each night. When Sunday came, they walked to town together, Judah trotting at their heels. Mara wore a shawl draped carefully over her head, shielding herself from the townspeople's suspicious glances. The church bell rang clear in the morning air as they took seats near the back. Reverend Alcott stood tall in his pulpit, his sermon, dancing around hard truths. "The Lord calls us to do justice," he proclaimed, though his eyes skipped past the water disputes that divided his flock. "To love mercy and walk humbly with our God." During the service, Elijah noticed small gestures. Of kindness, Mrs. Patterson, wife of a prominent rancher, pressed a fresh loaf of bread into Mara's hands after the final hymn. "For your table," she whispered, squeezing Mara's fingers before hurrying away. Their moment of peace shattered as Sheriff Danner intercepted them outside the church steps. His badge gleamed as he planted himself in their path, thumbs hooked in. His gun belt? "Heard you've been stirring up trouble." "Cross," he drawled. "Might want to mind your own business in these parts." "My business is my own," Elijah replied evenly, though his jaw tightened. "And what's mine, I aim to keep." The sheriff's eyes narrowed, but he stepped aside, letting them pass. The walk home felt longer under the weight of his warning. The sun? Already low when they reached the cabin, Mara lit the oil lamp as soon as they entered, its warm glow pushing back the gathering darkness. "There must be something we missed," she said, pulling out the stack of journals. "Mother would have left proof somewhere." They settled at the table, paper spread before them. Elijah watched as Mara handled each book reverently, her fingers tracing her mother's familiar handwriting. When she picked up the old hymnal, something about its weight made her pause. "This feels different," she murmured, turning it over. The binding was slightly loose, the cover worn. Carefully, she worked, her fingers along the edge until the leather separated, revealing a space within. Her sharp intake of breath drew Elijah closer. There, folded, yellowed with age, but still intact, lay a single sheet of parchment. Mara's hands trembled as she opened it. "It's the deed," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Mother's deed to the land." "Look, her signature, the official seal, everything." Elijah leaned in, studying the document in the lamplight. The legal language was clear, the boundaries precisely marked. Most importantly, the date and signatures were witnessed and recorded properly. "This is it," he said softly, awe and unease mixing in his chest. "This is what they tried to erase, proof that this land is rightfully yours." Mara pressed the deed to her heart, tears gleaming in her eyes. She hid it here in God's songs, knowing someday she couldn't finish. Overcome by the weight of her mother's foresight and faith, the lamp flickered, casting their shadows on the cabin walls. Outside, a coyote called lonely across the valley. Elijah stood quiet beside Mara, understanding that this piece of paper would change everything. The proof they held would challenge powerful men who had already shown they weren't afraid to use force to keep what they wanted. The mountain peaks in pale gold as Elijah and Mara prepared for their journey. Inside the cabin, steel rang against whetstone as Elijah sharpened his knife and axe. Each stroke was measured, deliberate. These weren't just tools anymore, they might need to be weapons. "Best to be ready," he muttered, testing the blade's edge. With his thumb, beside him, Mara packed cornbread and dried meat into a canvas sack, her movements quick and focused. The deed lay carefully wrapped in oilcloth, tucked inside her shawl. Judah paced by the door, his claws clicking against the wooden floor. The big hound's ears twitched at every sound, sharing his master's unease. Even the morning felt brittle, like frost ready to crack. "Remember," Elijah said as they loaded the wagon, "let me do the talking in town. Some folks won't take kindly to—" He stopped, not wanting to name the prejudice they both knew too well. Mara nodded, her face composed. "I understand." She climbed onto the wagon seat, settling her shawl to shadow her features. The deed pressed against her heart like a burning coal. They set out as the sun cleared the ridge, the wagon's wooden wheels creaking along the rutted trail. Elijah sat straight, reins loose in his weathered hands. His rifle lay across his lap, a necessary precaution. Judah trotted alongside, alert to every rustle in the brush. The journey stretched long, each mile marked by the steady clip of hooves and groan of timber. They passed scattered homesteads where women paused in their chores to stare. A group of cowboys shifted their mounts off the trail, watching with hard eyes beneath their hat brims. Town emerged from the morning haze-falls-fronted buildings, hitching posts. Elijah guided the wagon. Down the main street, past the general store where women gathered to whisper, the county clerk's office stood next to the jail, its windows reflecting the sharp morning light. "Wait here," Elijah said, helping Mara down. Judah stationed himself by the wagon, hackles slightly raised. Already, curious townsfolk were gathering, drawn by the unusual sight. Inside the clerk's office, dust motes danced in slanted sunlight. The clerk looked up from his ledger, spectacles catching the glare. His eyes narrowed at Mara, but settled professionally on Elijah. "How can I help you today?" Mara withdrew the deed with steady hands, unfolding it carefully on the desk. The clerk's fingers traced the official seal, following the precise legal language. His brow furrowed in concentration. "This appears valid," he said finally, reaching for his recording book. "The signatures and witnesses are proper. I'll need to make an official copy." Relief softened Mara's shoulders, though she remained silent. As instructed, outside voices grew louder as word spread through town. Bootsteps thudded on the wooden sidewalk. The clerk worked methodically, copying every detail. When he finished, he pressed his seal into red wax, making it official. "The land is legally yours, Miss Alvarado." "Your mother's claim stands." Crowd had gathered outside, their shadows dark against the windows. Ranchers stood in small groups, faces thunderous with anger. Town wives clutched their shawls, watching. The tension felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Reverend Alcott pushed through the crowd just as Elijah and Mara emerged. The preacher's voice carried across the morning air. "Now, friends, let's keep our heads. The law must be respected." "The law," someone spat. "What about our water rights?" Mara stepped forward, her voice clear and firm despite Elijah's warning. "This land is ours, by right and by God." She held the deed high, sunlight catching the official seal. "My mother's blood is in that soil. We claim what was stolen, nothing more." The crowd shifted, dividing like water around a stone. Some turned away, muttering curses and slurs that made Elijah's hand tighten on his rifle. Others stood quiet, understanding in their eyes. Mrs. Patterson nodded once, openly, before her husband pulled her away. "Best get moving," Elijah murmured, guiding Mara back to the wagon. Judah fell in beside them, a low growl rumbling in his chest at anyone who stepped too close. They drove out of town at an unhurried pace, refusing to show fear. Mara sat straight back to the recorded deed, secure in her shawl. A faint smile touched her lips as she watched the familiar mountains draw closer. "We did it," she whispered. "Mother's dream lives." Elijah made no reply, his eyes constantly scanning the ridgelines and brush. He knew too well how some men responded to defeat. The rifle stayed across his knees as they wound their way home, ready for whatever might come. Night settled heavy over the mountain cabin. Elijah's axe rang steadily against pine logs, echoing across the yard. Each swing drove deeper than needed, powered by the gnawing worry in his gut. Lamplight spilled from the cabin windows, warm against the gathering dark. Inside, Mara's soft humming drifted through the cracks between logs. An Oldham, her mother once sang. Judah patrolled the edges of the clearing, nose to the wind. The big hound's movements were purposeful, circling wider with each pass. His ears twitched at every snap of twig or rustle of leaf. The night felt too quiet, pressed down by the weight of waiting. Elijah paused to wipe sweat from his brow, despite the winter chill. The deed lay on the cabin's rough-hewn table, official seal gleaming in the lamplight. They should feel safer now, with the law behind them. But his years in the wilderness had taught him that paper laws meant little against men's greed. Inside, Mara traced her mother's careful script with gentle fingers. The journal's pages whispered as she turned them, revealing prayers and hopes. Penned years ago, the lamp cast dancing shadows across her face, peaceful despite the day's tension. Judah's bark shattered the night like breaking glass. Hoofbeats thundered suddenly close, pounding the frozen earth. Elijah dropped his axe, reaching for his rifle. "Mara," he shouted, "get down." Gunshots cracked through the darkness. Splinters flew from the cabin wall near Elijah's head. Orange light bloomed as burning torches arced through the air, crashing. Against the dry timber, flames caught hungrily in the roof shingles. Elijah sprinted for the door, smoke already threading through the cracks. Inside, Mara stood frozen, clutching her mother's journals. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward safety. "Run!" The rafters groaned as fire crawled across them, heat pressed down like a physical weight. Outside, horses wheeled and reared in the firelight. A rider's boot swung at Judah as the loyal hound snapped and snarled. The heavy kick caught him in the ribs. His yelp of pain cut through the chaos. Coughing against the thickening smoke, Elijah staggered into the yard. He found Judah struggling to rise, blood matting his brindled fur. Elijah scooped up the big dog, muscles straining. "Mara, this way!" They fled into the trees, branches whipping their faces. Behind them, their home became a tower of flame. The deed their proof, their hope lay forgotten on the table, already curling in the inferno's breath. Mara stumbled but kept running. Her mother's journals clutched tight against her chest. From the shelter of the forest, they watched helplessly as the cabin collapsed in on itself, sparks spiral upward, competing with the cold winter stars. The riders' shadows stretched long against the blaze before melting into the darkness, hoofbeats fading like distant thunder. Elijah's knees gave way. He sank to the frozen ground, despair clawing at his throat. Everything they'd worked for, everything they'd proven gone, in minutes of senseless violence. Beside him, Mara pressed her face into trembling hands, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Judah lay between them, each breath ragged and shallow. Blood darkened his coat where the rider's boot had struck. His loyal eyes never left Elijah's face. Even as pain glazed them, the words came unbidden to Elijah's lips, rough with smoke and grief. "God help us." He hadn't prayed, truly prayed, since burying his wife. But here in the dark, watching their world burn, the plea rose from somewhere deep and forgotten. "God help us all." The fire's glow painted everything in shades of amber and shadow. Mara's tears gleamed like copper on her cheeks. The journals she'd saved her mother's legacy were clutched tight against her heart. But the deed, their one piece of legal proof, was nothing but ash now. They huddled together in the cold. Three broken souls, watching their dreams turn to embers. The night pressed close around them, offering neither comfort nor answers. Only the sound of Judah's labored breathing marked the passing moments as their home burned down to nothing. The mountain cold bit deep as Elijah tore strips from his shirt. Hands trembling, Judah lay still against the cave floor, his breathing shallow but steady. The big hound's eyes followed every movement as Elijah cleaned the wound where the rider's boot had struck. Blood matted the brindled fur, but the ribs seemed only bruised, not broken. "Easy now, old friend," Elijah murmured, wrapping the makeshift bandages tight. Beside him, Mara ventured out into the darkness, returning with handfuls of fresh snow. Her teeth chattered as she packed it into their single remaining pot. The shallow cave offered little comfort, just enough depth to shelter from the wind. Smoke still rose from the valley below, a dark column against the stars. Their home, their proof. Their hopes all turned to ash in a matter of minutes. Dawn crept slowly across the sky, painting the smoke-filled valley in shades of gray and gold. Mara huddled close to Judah. Her mother's rescued journals clutched tight. Her voice broke the morning silence. "They came for me. All this destruction, it's because of who I am." Elijah looked up from rewrapping Judah's bandages. "No," he said firmly. "Evil came for the truth, not you. Men who burn homes in the night fear justice more than they fear God. Their stomachs growled, reminding them that grief couldn't fill empty bellies. Mara rose, determination replacing despair in her eyes. "I can set snares," she said. My mother taught me how. While she worked with twine and twigs, Elijah filled their pot with fresh snow, setting it over a small fire to boil. Judah stirred, managing to lift his head. His tongue found their hands in turn, offering comfort even in his pain. The loyal gesture brought tears to Mara's eyes. By midday, her snare yielded a rabbit. The meager meal became precious broth, warming their cold-numbed bodies. Judah accepted small sips, his strength slowly returning. The sound of approaching hoofbeats sent them scrambling for weapons, but it was Reverend Alcott who appeared, his horse lathered with sweat. He dismounted quickly, worry etched deep in his weathered face. "I followed the tracks," he said, breathing hard. When I saw the smoke, he stopped, taking in their condition. "You must leave," he urged. "The ranchers are talking revenge. This will only end in bloodshed." Mara straightened, her mother's strength showing in her stance. "This is our land," she said. "We have nowhere else to go." Elijah had remained silent, stoking their small fire. Now he looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "If we run, justice dies, not just for us, but for everyone who's been driven out before." The Reverend shifted uneasily, conflict clear in his expression. "I understand," but he paused, then sighed heavily. "I will pray for you both, for us all." He mounted his horse, looking old and tired. "God be with you," he whispered, before riding away. As evening approached, Elijah pulled his knife from its sheath. The familiar rhythm of stone against steel filled their shelter as he sharpened the blade. "We'll rebuild," he said simply, "starting tomorrow." Mara nodded, settling beside him. Her voice lifted in soft prayer words that mixed English and Apache, learned at her mother's knee. The familiar ritual seemed to calm them both. Outside, snow began to fall. The gentle flakes drifted down, covering the blackened ruins of their cabin. Nature's own blanket spread across the valley, softening the harsh edges of destruction. Judah shifted closer, pressing against their legs. His loyalty remained unshaken, a reminder that some bonds grew stronger in adversity. Together they watched the snow fall. 3 survivors, bound by more than circumstance. The night deepened around them, but something else deepened to their resolve to stand firm, to fight for what was right. The ranchers had meant to break their spirit along with their home. Instead, they had forged it stronger. Elijah tested his knife's edge with his thumb. "Come morning, we start again," he said quietly. "They think burning our home will drive us out, but a home is more than timber and nails." Mara's prayers continued, a soft counterpoint to the crackling fire. The snow fell steadily outside their shelter, each flake a promise that even the darkest nights must end. Morning light spilled across the valley, revealing the full extent of destruction. Elijah and Mara picked their way through the cabin's remains, ash swirling around their boots. Each step brought fresh heartache as charred beams. Cracked beneath their feet, sending up small clouds of soot, Mara lifted a blackened pot, turning it over in her hands. Though scorched, it would serve again. Elijah gathered scattered tools, a hammer here, a saw there, laying them carefully aside. The metal had survived where wood had not. Judah limped among the ruins, nose working. His sudden bark drew their attention to a familiar shape in the debris. Elijah reached down, pulling free the dog's old collar. Though scorched black in places, the leather remained whole, the metal buckle still gleaming dully. "Like you," Elijah said softly, scratching. Behind Judah's ears, too stubborn to give up. He fastened the collar back around the hound's neck, taking comfort in this small restoration. As they cleared debris near the fallen hearth, Elijah's spade struck something solid. The metallic ring cut through the morning air. He dropped to his knees, brushing ash aside with calloused hands. A box emerged, iron-bound, blackened by flame, but intact. "Mara," he called, voice rough with emotion. "Come see." She hurried over, hope and fear warring in her expression. Together they lifted the heavy box, setting it on a nearby timber. The lock had warped in the heat, but Elijah's knife made quick work of it. Inside, protected from the inferno, lay the journals, and beneath them, folded carefully, was the deed they thought lost forever. Mara's hands trembled as she lifted the papers, her mother's familiar handwriting, still clear on the pages. Tears streamed down her face as she clutched the documents to her chest. "Mama," she whispered, "you knew. You knew they'd tried to take it all." Elijah stood silent, hat in hand. "The Lord's hand," he murmured finally, awe in his voice. No other explanation. They worked with renewed vigor after that, clearing space. To rebuild, Elijah sorted through the fallen timbers. Identifying those still strong enough to use, Mara sketched plans in the dirt with a stick. Remembering the cabin's original layout, near midday, an unexpected sound drew their attention wagon wheels on the trail. Elijah reached for his rifle, but lowered it as familiar faces appeared. The miller's son drove the first wagon, loaded with fresh-cut lumber. Behind him came others, some carrying timber, others bringing bread and stew. "Heard what happened?" The miller's son said simply. "Ain't right, burning folks out." A group of children darted forward, hands full of nails saved from their fathers. Workshops? They offered them shyly to Mara, who thanked each one by name. More townspeople arrived throughout the day, bringing what they could spare in the distance. Riders watched from the ridgeland ranchers and their men, dark against the sky, but their presence seemed to strengthen rather than frighten the volunteers. Women who had turned away from Mara in church now shared their bread with her. Men who had stayed silent now raised hammers alongside Elijah by sunset. The cabin's frame stood again, hewn timbers rising from the ashes. Lanterns hung from the bare beams, casting warm light over tired but satisfied faces. Most of the townspeople had headed home, promising to return tomorrow. Mara sat near the temporary hearth, her mother's journals open in her lap. Elijah settled nearby, hands rough from the day's work. Judah lay between them, his tail thumping softly against the packed earth. "Though darkness surrounds us," Mara read aloud, "our faith lights the way. God's truth cannot burn, cannot fade, cannot die." Her voice trembled slightly. "Let those who come after find strength in these words." Elijah listened, his beard hiding the tears that slipped down his weathered cheeks. Years of bitterness began to crack, like ice in spring thaw. The words touched something long buried in his heart, hope, fragile but growing stronger. The lantern light flickered across the half-built walls, turning rough lumber to gold. Outside, stars emerged one by one, witnesses to resurrection. Within, the sheltering frame of their rising home, 3 souls found peace in the simple act of beginning again. Word of the recovered deed spread through town like wildfire. By mid-morning, Sheriff Danner's horse kicked up dust in front of the half-rebuilt cabin. He dismounted stiffly, thumbs hooked in his gun belt as he surveyed their progress. Judah growled low, but stayed by Elijah's side. "Heard you found some papers in the ashes," Danner said, squinting against the sun. "Best hand 'em over before things get worse." Elijah set down his hammer, wiping sweat from his brow. The deed's legal sheriff filed proper at the county office. "This ain't about law," Danner spat. "It's about preventing bloodshed. You want that on your conscience." Mara emerged from the cabin's frame, her mother's journal held close. "The violence isn't ours, Sheriff. We seek only what's rightfully ours. God's justice will prevail," she continued, voice steady despite Danner's cold stare. "Not man's greed or threats." The sheriff's jaw tightened. "Your choice then. Don't. Say, I didn't warn you." He mounted up, casting a dark look at the rebuilt walls before riding away. That afternoon, angry voices spilled from the saloon. Ranchers gathered inside, their threats carrying through the swinging doors. "Run them out," someone shouted. "Take back what's ours." But change was stirring in other corners of town. At the general store, Mrs. Peterson openly questioned why. The ranchers needed more water when they already controlled 3 creeks. The blacksmith, normally quiet on such matters, spoke of his father's tales of similar land grabs back east. Elijah felt the weight of it all pressing down as he worked. He'd never wanted to lead any cause, had come here seeking solitude, not battle. Yet here he stood, defending not just a cabin but truth itself. Sunday dawned clear and cold. Elijah and Mara walked to church together, Judah trailing behind. Townsfolk filled the pews, tension thick as morning fog. Rancher Vaughn sat in his usual front row, boots gleaming, while worried faces packed the back. Reverend Alcott rose slowly to the pulpit, gripping its edges with white knuckles. His voice trembled. At first, then grew stronger as he spoke. "Brothers and sisters," he began, "I have stayed silent too long. We cannot bury God's truth beneath man's greed." His eyes swept the congregation. "When we allow the powerful to steal from the weak, we mock the very gospel we claim to follow." Murmurs rippled through the church. Some shifted uncomfortably, while others nodded in agreement. Mara sat straight-backed in her pew, eyes fixed ahead, dignity in every line of her posture. "This land," Alcott continued, voice rising, "belongs to those who hold rightful claim, not to those who would take by force what they cannot gain by law." Vaughn stood abruptly, boots striking the wooden floor like hammer blows as he stormed out. Others followed, but more remained, listening intently as Alcott finished his sermon. After the service, people lingered in small groups, discussing what they'd heard. As Elijah stepped into the sunlight, a rancher's man spat deliberately at his boots, but others approached with quiet nods of respect, some even touching their hats to Mara. The real surprise awaited at the cabin. A line of wagons wound up the trail, loaded with fresh-cut logs and supplies. Neighbors Elijah barely knew worked alongside those he'd come to trust, raising walls and setting roof beams. "Ain't right what they did to you folks," old Tom Weber said, passing up shingles to younger men on the roof. "Figured it's time to choose sides." Mara stood in the doorframe of their growing home, tears streaming down her face as she watched the community at work. Women had brought food bread still warm from ovens, stew bubbling in iron pots. Children darted between the workers, carrying nails and tools. Elijah found himself standing beside her, throat tight with emotion. The cabin was more than shelter. Now it had become a symbol of something larger. Every hand that lifted a beam or drove a nail declared which side of justice they served. "We're not alone anymore," Mara whispered, wiping her eyes. Elijah nodded, watching Judah weave happily between the workers, accepting pats and scraps. "Reckon we never truly were," he said softly. "Just took folks time to show it." The day's work continued, wood thudding against wood, voices calling back and forth, the smell of fresh-cut pine mixing with wood smoke from the cooking fires. What had started as one man's purchase and one woman's claim had grown into something that would change the valley forever. Winter settled deep into the valley like a sleeping bear. Fresh snow draped the mountains in white silence, transforming familiar trails into ghostly paths. Travel slowed to a crawl as drifts piled high against fence posts and wagon wheels froze in their tracks. At the cabin, work continued despite the bitter cold. Elijah's hammer rang out daily, driving nails into new shingles while his breath clouded in the frigid air. Mara worked alongside him, her hands red and chapped as she passed up supplies. Together they sealed the roof beam by beam, determined to finish before the next storm. The hearth demanded particular care. Elijah fitted each stone with patience, remembering skills from years past. Mara mixed mortar, adding just enough sand to make it strong. When finished, the chimney drew true, sending smoke straight up into the winter sky. Judah patrolled their boundaries with renewed purpose. Though scars marked his hide where the raiders' boots had struck, his spirit remained unbroken. His bark echoed across the snow-filled yard, warning away any who might threaten his family. As wind howled through the pines like 1,000 lost souls, Judah's urgent barking cut through the darkness. Elijah grabbed his lantern and rifle, while Mara snatched up her own light. They hurried outside into the biting cold dot near the new fence line. Shadows moved against the snow. The lantern light revealed 3 of Vaughn's men, wire cutters in hand. They froze like startled deer, caught in the act of destroying the boundary. Elijah stepped forward, raising his lantern high. The flame cast his face in sharp relief, but he kept his rifle lowered. Mara stood beside him, her presence steady as stone. "You can burn wood," Elijah said, his voice carrying clear across the frozen ground. "But you can't burn truth." He paused, letting his words sink into the night air. "This land was given in faith, and faith will outlast fire." The men shifted, uneasily, shame creeping across their features. They glanced at each other, then at their tools, as if seeing their actions through new eyes. Without a word, they backed away, disappearing into the darkness like smoke. Mara touched Elijah's arm. "They heard you," she whispered. "Really heard. You, The following days brought unexpected change. Petitions circulated through town, bearing signatures from merchants, farmers, and even a few smaller ranchers. They called for official recognition of Mara's deed, demanding justice be properly served. Their voices reached all the way to the county seat. On a crisp morning, hooves crunched through fresh snow as Judge Harrison arrived, his black coat stark against the white landscape. Reverend Alcott and several townsfolk accompanied him, serving as witnesses. Inside the cabin, warmth from the new hearth wrapped around them all. Mara spread her mother's deed on the table, along with the journals that had survived the fire. Her hands trembled slightly as she stepped back. Judge Harrison adjusted his spectacles, examining each document with careful attention. Minutes stretched like hours as he read. The only sound the crack and pop of burning pine logs. Finally, he straightened, looking first at Mara, then at the assembled witnesses. This deed, he declared, his voice carrying the weight of law, is valid in all respects. The land and water rights belong, without question, to Miss Alvarado. Mara's fingers found Elijah's, gripping tight. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but her smile shone brighter than summer sun on snow. The gathered townsfolk nodded in approval. While Reverend Alcott's amen echoed what many felt, Elijah felt something shift inside his chest, like ice breaking up after a long freeze. For the first time since losing his wife, he bowed his head. In honest prayer. No words came at first, just gratitude so deep it ached. "Thank you, Lord," he whispered finally, humbled by how far they'd come. Outside, snow began falling again, big flakes drifting down like heaven's own blessing. They clung to the window panes and gathered on the new roof, sealing this moment in peaceful white. Judah sat in the doorway, tail sweeping the floor, watching over his family as justice and faith joined hands at last. The mountain winter began softening its grip as February drew to a close. Patches of earth emerged through melting snow like islands in a white sea. With the changing season came a shift in the town's heart as well, where once threats had flowed like bitter water. Now respect trickled in, drop by drop. Even Sheriff Danner's demeanor transformed. One morning, as Elijah loaded supplies at the general store, the lawman approached with measured steps. "Mr. Cross," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His eyes, once hard as gunmetal, now held something closer to regard. Miss Alvarado settling in. "All right, she is," Elijah answered carefully, noting how the sheriff used Mara's proper name instead of cruder terms from before. "Good to hear." Danner shifted his weight. "Town's quieter now that things are settled proper." With a final tip of his hat, he moved on, unwilling to stand against the tide of public opinion that had turned in their favor. The cabin, though still showing traces of its burning, had risen again from ash. New timbers gleamed alongside blackened beams, a testament to both destruction and renewal. The evening air carried the scent of pine smoke and cooking as neighbors gathered for a simple supper. Mara had prepared a hearty stew, stretching what they had to welcome others to their table. Reverend Alcott brought fresh bread, still warm from his wife's oven. The Miller family arrived with preserved peaches, while others carried what they could spare. Soon the cabin hummed with voices where silence had once pressed heavy as stone. Children, who had once been warned away, now sprawled on the floor, taking turns scratching Judah's ears. The big hound soaked up their attention like sunshine, his tail thumping steadily against wooden planks. His scars from the night of the fire had healed, leaving his coat marked but his spirit unbroken. "He's like the cabin," young Tommy Miller observed, running his fingers through Judah's brindled fur. "Got some marks but still standing strong." Laughter filled the room, honest and warm. It spilled from the windows into the evening air, chasing away the last shadows of darker days. Elijah watched it all from his place by the hearth, something tight in his chest beginning to loosen. After the meal, as folks settled with coffee and tea, Mara cleared her throat softly. "I'd like to share something," she said, holding one of her mother's journals. The room quieted, all eyes turning to her. She opened to a marked page, her fingers gentle on the worn paper. "This is the last letter my mother wrote," she explained, her voice steady despite the weight of memory. "I found it when we recovered the journals from beneath the hearth." Firelight caught the tears in her eyes, but her voice remained clear as she read. "Justice flows deeper than springs, and love carves rivers through stone. The words settled over the room like a blessing. Several women wiped their eyes, while the men shifted in their seats, touched by the simple truth of it. Even the children seemed to sense the importance of the moment, their usual fidgeting stilled. "Your mama was right about that," Mrs. Miller said softly. "We've all seen it proved here." Agreement murmured through the room. The truth of water rights had indeed carved through years of prejudice, creating new channels of understanding among neighbors. As the evening drew to a close, folks began gathering their things. Children were bundled against the night air, and promises made to gather again soon. Each farewell felt like another stitch binding the community closer together. Finally, only Elijah and Mara remained, sitting before the fire as it burned low. Judah dozed nearby, still wearing the contentment of an evening well spent. Mara broke the comfortable silence first. "I think God meant me to return here," she whispered, her words barely louder than the crackling flames. Elijah turned to look at her, really look at her. Firelight painted her face in gentle shadows, highlighting the strength and grace that had drawn him from his solitude. He saw now what he had been too wounded to recognize before family. "And maybe he meant me to be waiting," he answered, surprising himself with the sureness he felt. They sat in reverent silence then, watching the fires dance. The cabin seemed to breathe around them, its walls holding not just warmth, but life past and present, mingling like streams joining to form a river dot through the window. Stars winked against the dark sky, bright as hope and just as endless. The night air carried the promise of spring, of new beginnings written in an ancient hand. Here, in this place of redemption, two souls had found not just shelter, but purpose. Not just healing, but home. March winds swept down from the mountains, carrying whispers of spring's approach. Each day brought subtle changes to the land, patches of grass emerging from melting snow, creeks swelling with crystalline runoff, early wildflowers dotting sunny slopes. The transformation mirrored the renewal taking place at the cabin, where life flourished once more. Elijah and Mara walked their property boundaries together, Judah trotting ahead with his nose to the ground. The big hound paused occasionally to investigate rabbit trails, but never strayed far from his family. His coat gleamed in the strengthening sunlight, scars from winter's battle now hidden beneath new growth. "Fence needs mending here," Elijah noted, running weathered hands along a sagging rail. Without another word, he shouldered his tools and set to work. Mara joined him, their movements falling into an easy rhythm born of shared purpose. Together they had learned the language of restoration hammer strikes and saw teeth, dirt under fingernails, and honest sweat. Near the spring, they paused to watch clear water bubble up from earth's depths. The flow ran strong and true, no longer a source of conflict, but a blessing to be shared. Mara knelt beside it, touching the surface gently. "My mother used to say, 'Water knows the way,'" she said softly. "It always finds its path no matter what. It stands in its way." Elijah nodded, understanding deeper meanings in her words. Like the spring, truth had found its way past obstacles. Carving new channels through old prejudices, they spent afternoons preparing soil for planting. Turning earth that had lain fallow too long, Mara scattered seeds with prayer-like reverence, beans and squash in traditional patterns she remembered from her mother's teachings. Elijah worked beside her, learning the ancient wisdom of companion planting that would help their garden thrive. The cabin drew visitors regularly now, neighbors stopping by with gifts to celebrate new beginnings. Martha Miller brought a hand quilt, its patterns telling stories of faith and perseverance. The Cooper family arrived with seed corn saved from their best harvest, ensuring strong crops for the coming season. Even the sheriff's wife appeared one afternoon, carrying bread still warm from her oven. Most touching were the hymnals, brought by various townspeople to replace those lost in the fire. Each book carried inscriptions of encouragement and welcome, pages marked with ribbons at beloved songs of praise. The growing collection found a home on rough-hewn shelves, testament to a community's changing heart. One crisp morning, Reverend Alcott rode up, his gentle mare picking carefully along the muddy path. He accepted Mara's offer of coffee, then, asked to pray over their home. They gathered on the porch, where spring sunshine warmed the weathered boards. "Lord," Alcott began, his voice carrying on the breeze, "make this place a house of peace. Let justice flow like living water from its spring, and may all who seek shelter here find rest for their souls." His words settled like a benediction, blessing both structure and inhabitants. As evening approached, Elijah built up the fire while Mara prepared their supper. Judah sprawled contentedly before the hearth, his presence a constant comfort. The cabin held warmth now that had nothing to do with flames, the warmth of belonging, of purpose fulfilled. Mara rose quietly and took her mother's journals from where they had rested. Since being rescued from the fire, with deliberate care, she placed them on the mantel, no longer hidden beneath floorboards, but displayed with honor. Their weathered covers caught firelight, shadows dancing across carefully preserved pages. Elijah watched her, seeing strength and grace in every movement. His voice, when he spoke, carried the weight of revelation. "I bought a cabin for shelter. Instead, the Lord gave me family." Mara turned to him, tears gathering in her eyes but joy illuminating her face. "And justice for my mother," she replied softly, outside. Stars began appearing in the deepening dusk, their light falling gently on the valley below. Inside, lamplight cast a golden glow over their faces, warming the room where shadows once held sway. The cabin stood as it had for years, yet transformed, no longer abandoned, but redeemed, no longer empty, but filled with the presence of love, faith, and family restored. If you believe stories can heal, lift, and connect us, this channel is for you. Thanks for being here. Hit subscribe, and I'll meet you again tomorrow with something real.